I actually signed up for Disney. I should actually get Disney to sponsor this so as I could watch Say Nothing. It had been recommended to me, right? And I was enthralled by it. I actually really did binge it. Such an amazing dramatization of the story, really, of... How do you pronounce her name?
She pronounced it Dolours.
So she pronounced it, so they pronounced it correct on the... Because I always thought it was Dolours or whatever. So it's anyway, Dolours.
Yeah, she pronounced it Dolours, yeah.
Dolours Price. But here I am coming to the end of it. And the next thing, Allison Morris lands at her door. Actual Allison Morris. And I thought, oh my God, I actually know someone famous. This is amazing. So you took a starring role. Now, an actress played you in this story. But for anyone who hasn't seen it, just tell us a little bit about Say Nothing and what it's about.
Well, Say Nothing is told through the eyes of Dolours Price and then partly through the eyes of Brenton Hughes, who was another IRA man from that generation. It's based on the very controversial Boston College tapes. So these were confessions that were made by IRA members who were told that they wouldn't be released until after their death. Then the PSNI sought an injunction to receive it and were able to receive some of that. There was a number of prosecutions pending in relation to that, one against an IRA man called Ivor Bell. That ended because he was deemed unfit to stand trial with dementia. The other case was a guy called Winston Ray, who was a loyalist who made one of the tapes, and he died before his trial could take place. But anyway, it's based on those. So a very specific point of view. Now, it must be said, just to caveat this, that both Brenton Hughes and Dolours Price in their later years fell out with Sinn Féin and became, I suppose, outspoken opponents of the peace process. They seen it as a betrayal. They seen it, as traitors to the cause, and that they should have kept fighting, and that, what was this all for type thing. So it's seen through that very specific eyes. But it's based on a book by a guy called Patrick Radden Keefe, who is an American journalist. It started off, he was commissioned to write an article for the New Yorker. And then the article was such a success that it became a book. And then the book was such a success that the rights were bought to it, and it's turned into this Disney drama. I already did have Disney because I have grandchildren.
That's
so I
the
did
dream.
have
Did you? Yeah. No, I had it. I have to be honest, I had it on somebody else's account, and they very, very cruelly knocked me off. So anyway, so I have it again now. But anyway, and it starts basically with the old style tape recorder, the record button being pressed, and the actress Maxine Peake, who plays the older Dolours, is starting to tell her story. She's a chain smoker. You can see, certainly if she's portrayed well, a very good looking woman. She was herself and her sister, Marian Price, were brought up in a very Republican, staunch, as we'd call it, household. Their father appears to have been very active and has sort of definitely given them... Did they go to a peace march and it all went wrong and they were attacked? Did that actually happen? I wonder.
They did go to the peace march, but I mean, I don't know whether you would say that sort of radicalised them. They already were, I suppose, radicalised, the point that they did come from that very, very Republican tradition.
Yeah.
Their father was Albert Price, who was a very well-known Republican. It shows you the aunt, and I remember when I interviewed her, she spoke about the aunt Bridget, who'd been blown up while she was planting a bomb.
Yeah.
I mean, their sort of Republican credentials goes right back to the sort of that 50s campaign. I think her father was interned in the Cur. There's a whole Republican history there. And the Price sisters would have been really well known. Throughout the conflict, there was a huge campaign that went on to try and have the sisters repatriated back to Armagh prison to serve their sentence for blowing up the Old Bailey. And they were interesting characters, albeit I knew of them and had seen Marian out and about because she still lived in West Belfast. Very, very different personality than to Dolours.
Right.
And then what actually happened in my involvement ended up in this story was that in and around the Christmas time, I think it was, of about 2010, I'd got wind, I was working in the Irish News at the time, I got wind of another member of the disappeared. So we know that there's the disappeared victims of IRA violence. In 1998, the IRA I think it was 1990 that the IRA handed over details of all the people that they disappeared and vowed to help the commission, the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, to find those people. What happened next was obviously then there was some of those people were found, some accidentally, like Jean McConville, and some were found through that investigation. But there was a name there was actually a couple of names that were left off the list, but one of the names left off the list was a guy called Joe Linsky. We got wind that this had happened, and I then had to go and speak to loads of old members of the IRA who I knew had been around in the 70s to try and get information. At the start, a lot of them were very cagey and, oh, no, I don't think I do. And then some sort of broke ranks and said, yeah.
So what were you trying to find out at that point? Why the information as regards his whereabouts, or why he had...
I'd never heard of this guy before in my life. So his name was not on the list of disappeared. Nobody at this point knew a man called Joe Linsky existed, that he had been murdered and that he'd been secretly buried. So I finally verified it. I had to then go and try and speak to the Linsky family. And I remember, and I suppose this is when the younger people that listen to this will go, I don't even know what this woman's talking about. I had to get the big old BT phone book and go through it and look for the name Linsky.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that common a name. I think there was only about 12 people maybe called Linsky in the phone book. And I had to sit and phone every one of them and say, do you know a guy called Joe Linsky who disappeared in the 70s? And I eventually struck lucky and found a relative. They agreed to meet me. I had a meeting in a hotel. They were very, very nervous. And they had said yes, that he was, their father's brother. He had gone away. They had been told at the time he was in America. They now believe that he was murdered and secretly buried. And so the story broke. Big front page story, huge story. And a couple of days later, the IRA issued a statement admitting that yes, that they had murdered this guy and that they would now cooperate with the commission to find his remains. And then the commission issued a statement saying that their remit was very specific, but they have now included Joe Linsky within their remit and they would be searching for him.
And Alison, just for those maybe who don't totally understand the significance of the disappeared, this was a particular sort of terrorism used by the IRA as a threat to their own, that, if you touted or if you were found to have done anything wrong, you wouldn't only go missing, your families would never see you again, ever. You would literally be disappeared. It was above and beyond kind of murdering somebody and leaving their body to be discovered and obviously given a Catholic burial or whatever.
That wasn't known at the time. So what happened in the 70s is there was a number of people who were accused of being informers who were killed and disappeared. So they included Jean McConville, who was a mother tenant Divis. They included two IRA men called Seamus Wright and Kevin McKee. And they admitted to being informers and working for the British intelligence. At the time, this idea of disappearing people wasn't made public like a threat. It wasn't, if you touch, you'll be disappeared, because the idea at the time, and this is what I believe, the idea at the time was that if people knew that the IRA was infiltrated, it would be bad for morale and bad for, internal discipline within the organisation. So these people were disappeared, and then elaborate sort of, I suppose, elaborate ruse was set in place where people would go on holiday to America and send a postcard signed in their name, or someone would say, "Oh, I was on holiday in New York and I met him, and he's doing great." And and Jean McConville's case, I think her family got a postcard from Blackpool, saying that she was there. So other people would say, "Oh, they run off to join the British Army," or it is like literally left to join the circus material. Do you know what I mean? People just leaving. So there was a sort of a
so their memory as such was tainted for their families. That like Jean McConville, for example, whose kids were left behind in Divis flats, never to see her again. They were to believe that their mother had gone and left them.
Yeah, and it was the unknown. And years later, it's funny how, we have victims and then we have victims across into different groups of victims, and they all join together, because in one case, so you have the McConville children who are a victim of the Troubles, and, one of the disappeared families and their mother. They were then taken into care. Now, they spent quite a bit of time in the house on their own after their mother disappeared, thinking she was going to come back. Then it was reported to social services, and they were all taken and split up and sent to different places. And some were put into foster care places where they were very well cared for, and others were put into children's home where they were then abused. And so when the historical abuse inquiry was taking place. Some of the McConville children give evidence to that in relation to the abuse that they'd suffered. And I got to know Tommy and Billy McConville fairly well at that time because I would have covered that a lot. And I remember speaking to them about that. They were the youngest. They were among the youngest of the children. And they were sent to a number of boys' homes. And they kept running away and kept getting in trouble for running away. And one of them said to me, if they knew that she was dead, that they later got a report that says, missing, presumed murdered. If they'd have told us she was dead, we'd stop running away. We just wanted to find her. So they were like 8 and 10 years old or whatever. And they were like running away and trying to hitchhike from, away back a county down or wherever they were to try and get back to West Belfast because they thought their mother was going to come back. And then they were getting in trouble for doing that. And then they were physically abused. And in the case of Billy McConville, he was also sexually abused. And, the day that the report of the historical abuse inquiry came out, Billy, I said to him, well, what age were you when you went to the home? And he said, well, I can't really remember, but I do know that was the Christmas that I found out that there was no Santa because I run down to the living room that morning and there was nothing there. And he says, and I hadn't been bad. And he was like a wee child, even though he was a 50-year-old man, he ended up dying of cancer. And that, I think it was just shortly after that, maybe just shortly before the new year, that they were eventually taken into care. So they'd spent Christmas on their own, being looked after by the elder sister. Yeah. So there was that, and that was one of the cases. The idea, I suppose, behind disappearing her was the propaganda to the British of saying that the IRA killed this woman would have been too much to bear. So there was a decision. So there was a group called, I think they were the Unknowns, who were handpicked, and they were the people who were responsible for disappearing people. It was a sort of secretive unit within a secretive army that no one really knew. So Dolours was in it, Marian Price was in it, a guy called Pat McClure, who since died, was in it. And they were responsible for helping to drive these people across the border, mainly to Monaghan, where they were handed over to a local branch of the IRA, where they were court-martialed, and then they were ordered to death, and they were taken somewhere. A priest, and we never know who the priest is, came along, gave them the last rites, and they were murdered and put in an unmarked grave. And it was very difficult then to go back and find them because, as the people like John Hill, who's in charge of the Disappeared Commission, would say, they were never meant to be found. A secret grave is a secret grave. It's never meant to be found. So then you're asking someone 50 years later, tell me where you put that person in the dead of night in 1972, and they can't tell you. So she was part of that. And so the interview, the story about Joe Linsky breaks, and then Gerry Adams is interviewed about that. He's not interviewed about that. He was just interviewed about something else. And then part of that, he was asked, do you know Joe Linsky? And he said, he gave a very vague answer, I think I might have known him. And this enraged Dolours Price. And so she started ringing the newspaper. And then a few days later, I went down to meet her down in her house in Malahide. Now, so
in the drama, it's depicted that she rings and she leaves a message. She looks for you to come and see her, and she's something to tell you. She has obviously turned. She doesn't like Gerry Adams. She's turned on the IRA.
Long before that, she had turned on Gerry Adams, and they were very vocal, outspoken opponents of the peace process and signing up to policing structures. Her aunt Marian ended up doing time for the real IRA, so she became involved in dissident Republicans. I should say that Dolours, in between being released from prison, so they bombed the Old Bailey.
Yes.
And then they were released from prison. She then marries Stephen Ray, Oscar-nominated actor. She lives with him. They had 2 sons, and then they were divorced. So she was living in a very beautiful home in Malahide, in what would be, a sort of millionaire's row in Malahide. And that was, I'm assuming, the house that she had received at the family home. And so in the drama, you see me knocking the door and her getting up all bleary-eyed to answer the door. Well, that is completely dramatised because I couldn't actually find her house, and I phoned her, and she came out to the end of the driveway and waved me in to where her house was. And I also had someone else with me, a photographer with me at the time. And so we went in then to speak to her. And then she started telling, I sat on the sofa beside her and I turned my dictaphone on and she started to speak. And it was the most, this most surreal moment of my life, because Dolours had serious problems in terms of her own mental health. You'll see if you watch the drama, they were force-fed in prison, her and Marian, and they suffered a lot, with anorexia, and mental health issues as a result
addiction,
of that.
etc.
And yeah, a lot of things. Now, I had been told and I had known that she had suffered from addiction to prescription medication and to alcohol. When I showed up to interview her, you wouldn't have known it looking at her. I can put it like that. She was, you can see in the drama, she's portrayed as being someone who was full of life and very glamorous, and that was her. She was incredibly beautiful. She was an older woman at this stage. And I remember looking, and there was not so much as a wrinkle or a mark or a vein on her face. I mean, she had skin like milk. She had aged incredibly well for someone who had lived the extreme life that she had lived. And she started speaking. Now, there was the house had basically a shrine to republicanism. There was a full wall. It was full like the proclamation and artifacts that belonged to her father. And she started speaking, and it was, almost like a history lesson in terms of the beginning of the Troubles. She spoke about how, Republican her family was and her aunt was, and she spoke about that. And then she spoke about wanting to join the IRA and her going to join the IRA. And they said, go away and join the Common Amon. So that would have been the women's part of, of the IRA at that time. And the Common Amon would have been, I suppose, in a supportive role, that had moved weapons and prams and, bandaged people up and all of that, and took lookouts and done those sort of things. And she went, I don't want to do that. I want to fight. I don't want to bandage up people's wounds. I want to get out and fight. I'm not Florence Nightingale. I'm a fighter. I'm a, revolutionary. And so they had to change. The area had to have a special Army Council convention and change the rules to allow her to join. And Marian then joined with her shortly afterwards. And what I didn't know until I spoke to her was, when they went to bomb the Old Bailey, she was with Gerry Kelly, now an MLA, and another fella, and I assumed, I don't know why, maybe the patriarchy has internalised our feelings, I suppose. I assumed Gerry Kelly was in charge of that, and he wasn't. She was in charge of that operation, and she was the OC of that operation and giving out the orders. They were all captured. They were imprisoned. They were put into a male prison, her and Marian, because it was high security and none of the female prisons in England were. And then they went on hunger strike and they were force fed. They forced their mouths open and stuck tubes down their mouths and poured food into their mouths. And when they vomited back up, and Gerry Kelly was also force fed too during that time because they wanted repatriated back to prisons here. They eventually, close to death, they were moved to Armagh prison and then were given a royal pardon and released due to ill health. And they both at that stage appeared to just go away and get on with their lives away from the IRA, and then re-emerged shortly after the peace process as vocal opponents of that. And as I said, Marian became involved with the real IRA.
How did she speak about Marian? Like they are portrayed and say nothing as they sort of, no, I don't. They didn't stay close, did they, towards the end of their lives?
No, I mean, and there is another sister, but that wasn't. She has nothing to do with that word, so she wasn't really mentioned at all. But she was very protective of her. There are things that are in that drama about Marian that she didn't tell me. She may have told them to the Boston tapes, but she certainly didn't tell me because I could see that she was ready to confess her own sins, if you know what I mean. She was ready to clear it all. Now, her motivation for that was obviously to damage Gerry Adams, but she was ready to say whatever she wanted to say. But she didn't tell me anything really that would have incriminated Marian. She still remained, even though I don't think that they were in great terms that time, she still remained very defensive of her. And when she spoke about Jean McConville and the disappearance of her, she spoke with no regrets whatsoever. She insisted that Jean McConville was an informer, that it was known that she was an informer. The whole thing about the red slippers, that she was seen from behind the blanket, that she had a transmitter in her house, all of this. I mean, the Ombudsman found no evidence of that, but all of that she repeated. With Wright and McKee, she says she drove them across the border as well, she told me, and she said, well, it was unfortunate, they knew the rules, they had broken the rules. But when she spoke of Joe Linsky, she sobbed and cried, and it was clear that kept her awake at night, that was one of her demons, that she loved him. And when I say love him, I mean in a platonic sense. She clearly loved him and respected him. She said he was a lovely, gentle man. And that's the thing about Joe Linsky's a very interesting character in himself. So he was a monk. He had trained to be a monk and he'd been in the convent as a very young man. He left the convent. He became an IRA intelligence officer. he was in his 40s and these were all young people in their teens and 20s. So he was sort of like the elder statesman of them. And she was very close to him. And she said, which isn't depicted in the drama, she picked him up from his home and to take him away. What Joe Linsky had done is he had not been accused of informing. Joe Linsky had fallen for the wife of another IRA member and had become completely and utterly besotted by this woman, such to the point where he decided that if her husband was dead, that he could be with her. And he sent another younger IRA member, told him that this was an army order, and sent him round to this man's house to kill him. And the man opened the door and he was shot. Now, he survived that attack. But at that time, the IRA thought they were feuding with the official IRA, so the professional IRA and the official IRA were feuding. They thought that this was an official IRA attack on one of their members. And at one stage, Brenton Hughes was about to order that a bar that was frequented by members of the official IRA be riddled, as in retaliation, before they realised that Joe Linsky had actually ordered this. So that had sealed his fate. She said that as she was driving him, she was on her own driving him across the border, and she begged him not to go. She said, I'll take you to the port, I'll take you to the boat, get on the boat, disappear to England, please don't do this. And he said, no, that'll get you in trouble. And, this is my problem, this is something that I caused, I'll take my medicine. And she left him in Monaghan. And after the story broke, I got a number of contacts from a guy from the Monaghan IRA. He's an elderly man then, and I'm assuming he's well dead now. And we spoke for a long, long time, over a long period of time. And he had been in charge of minding Joe Linsky in this sort of so-called safe house. And he said he could have escaped had he wanted. I mean, it wasn't like we had him under 24-hour guard, but he made no attempt to escape. And he said the only thing that he'd asked for was rosary beads. He was clearly very devoutly Catholic. As I said, he'd been a monk. And I'm not surprised that when they have, there's remains have obviously been found. We're still waiting for them to be verified as being Joe Linsky. This had nothing to do, by the way, with the programme. The Disability Commission have been working on this information for a long time. The remains were found in the grave of the relatives of Bishop Cumsky. It was actually his mother and I think her brother's grave. And it had been dug after she had died. And the IRA went in the dead of night, buried Joe Linsky, put earth over the top of him, and then she's been buried on top of him. And it didn't actually surprise me. Now, whether it hasn't been officially verified as him, I'm pretty 99% sure that it is him. But it didn't surprise me in that I know that if his last request, having spoken to people who did know him, he would have wanted to be buried in consecrated ground, because as someone, especially of that old Catholic tradition in the 70s, you wouldn't believe that you would go to heaven unless your body was placed in consecrated ground. And I wonder, in return for not fighting and not arguing and not trying to run and not making a fuss and going quietly to his death, did he say, could you please bury me in a chapel ground? Don't be leaving me, in a field somewhere. So it didn't shock me that that's where his remains were found.
How did Dolours Price, like in real life, what was her house like? I mean, you said there was a kind of a shrine to republicanism, but was she functioning properly? She was coming towards the end of her life. I think she died in 2013. Was she friendly? Was she warm? Did she offer you tea?
She was lovely. She has a very vibrant personality. She had a very engaging personality, very different from Marian, who, would be hard to get on with. I'm trying to be nice here, but she would be very sort of abrasive and brisk, and wouldn't be the friendliest. Well, not with journalists anyway.
Yeah.
But whereas Dolours was she was very welcoming. She was very beautiful. She was very elegant. She spoke her diction and her way of speaking was theatrical. If you had, I can imagine she was very at home with the Stephen Ray set, with that sort of lovey actor, stage actor type set. And in another world, she maybe would have been one of those people, in another life. If you'd have said to me, you're going down to interview a sort of aging, sort of washed up Oscar winning actress, I would have said, yeah, okay, because that's sort of what the impression she gave.
What it felt like, yeah.
The house was beautiful, but I'm sure worth a fortune, but I suppose I would call it shabby chic. It was, it had been beautiful furniture, beautiful home, but, just a wee bit, like I suppose what my own home house looks like, basically untidy. But not like the house of someone who was an alcoholic or was down and out. I mean, it was still a beautiful home.
So she was still functioning, because there was some criticism around that she was, she didn't know what she was saying or whatever. But I mean, it was far from that. You were obviously together for a long period of time. This conversation was,
it
she structured it.
Just as we were about to leave, a head stuck, a wee head stuck around the corner, and it was one of her sons who was the absolute spitting image of Stephen Ray, and he said, "My Aunt Marian's on the phone for you." And I was like, "For me?" She's like, "Yeah." So I went out, and Marian Price was screeching down the phone because she had said, "Well, Ed Maloney's doing this story. You've no." And I says, "Well, your sister's a grown woman. It's for her to say who she speaks to, not you." And I went on about my business, and that was it. Marian ended up going to prison then for supplying the phones that were used in the attack on Masserine Barracks, where 2 soldiers died. So she was in jail when Dolores died, and then she had to be, I think she was given compassionate parole to attend the house on the day of the funeral. No, I believed every word that she was saying, and it was all verifiable in terms of times and dates and stuff. Her past recall was perfect. Was she damaged? Oh God, yes. Completely damaged person. I speak to damaged people every day of the week. Most of the people who have lived through our conflict have PTSD. They suffer from mental health and addiction issues and all sorts of other things. It doesn't invalidate their story. They still have very valid stories to tell. But what I did notice is, because it didn't just end there, I did speak to her numerous times prior to publication, because I was worried that what she had said had implicated herself in such a way that even as a journalist, I felt that I needed to sort of protect her as the person who was my source, if you like, albeit she wasn't being anonymous. And so, about 2 days later, I would have rang her frequently to check a few things, to say, "Look, you told me this. Can you tell me more?" And what I realised is that you had to phone her before about 2:00 in the day. So before 2:00 in the day, she was always perfectly lucid and polite and, and helpful. And after that time, you could tell she had drink on her. So if you phoned her at 6:00 at night, you couldn't have printed anything she told you at that time, because she was clearly intoxicated. I was lying in bed about 2 days after it, because I couldn't sleep, because it was the magnitude of what she told me was so enormous. You knew that this was public interest, but at the same time too, it was, and for my career at that time, it was, the hugest, biggest story that I'd ever covered. And it dawned on me that the Independent Commission for Location of Victims' Remains carried with it immunity from prosecution if you were to provide information that would lead to the recovery of remains. And so I did contact her and say, "Look, before I print this story, would you go and speak to the commission? Because if you tell them what you know about Wright and McKee, who hadn't been found at that time, and about Joe Linsky, it will give you a degree of protection and a degree of immunity from prosecution." And she did do that. She verified with me that she had spoken to them, and then the story was public. And then she gave a couple of interviews after that. I think she spoke to CNN and a few other people as well after that. But no, I think look, listen, had she an agenda? Yes, of course she has. But then most of the people I speak, everyone has an agenda, to be quite honest with you. I mean, their agenda's changed.
Everyone has an agenda. You just have to work out if you're okay with the agenda.
Yeah, did she? Yes. Did she have a story to tell? My goodness, she had a remarkable story to tell. She'd lived a remarkable life. Wasn't the public interest just 100% sure? And did I believe she was in a compass state of mind when I spoke to her? Yes, I did. If I'd have spoke to her at night time when she was drunk, no, she wouldn't have been. But she was someone who clearly drank in the evenings. And then during the day, her recall of past events was perfect. She was still very defensive of Marian. She didn't tell me any of the stuff that appears in the end part of that programme in relation to Jean McConville, and people can watch it for themselves to see what it is that happens. But she definitely didn't tell me any of that. That came from the Boston tapes. It didn't come from anything I told her, or that she told me.
Go back to what you said at the beginning, that they were radicalised, which is a great word, really. And maybe we see it nowadays more to do with, that Islamic radicalisation, or we're more comfortable with it there because it's further away from us, isn't it? But was she still radicalised then? Or,
No.
She had turned against the IRA. She'd obviously didn't have a good relationship or couldn't stand Gerry Adams, etc. But that radicalisation that had happened to her as a child and from the home she came from?
I think that she was slightly more reflective as an older woman. And I do think that's probably why she drank in the evenings, because after what they had been through and what she had done. So clearly she had her demons in terms of she brought people to their deaths. She bombed London. She did lots of other things in terms of things that, the conflict was raging here at that time. So I suppose what the Disney drama does, and bear in mind, it is a drama. It's fictional, albeit it's based on real events. It's fictional. A lot of that things didn't happen in the order or the way that they said that they did. It does show, I suppose, very aptly how very young, very beautiful, very promising people, very intelligent young people can depend on the circumstances, and the circumstances of Northern Ireland at that time, and this, the fact that there was discrimination, the civil rights movement, the fact that there was violence in the streets all around them, can then become part of something. I think it showed that, and then it showed what the next step of that is that you become involved in things that a normal person normally wouldn't even consider doing. And then the aftermath of that is how you deal with that as an older person, how you deal then with the consequences of your actions. She was struggling with the consequences of her actions, not because I think that she thought that they were terribly wrong. I think she still believed in the cause that she joined the IRA for, but because she believed that the peace process had been a sellout, and therefore she thought, well, why didn't you do that in 1970 then, before I did all of this? Why leave it until so many people had sacrificed so much until you do it? And that seemed to be her attitude. And people are entitled to hold whatever views they want to hold. I did find it, it was a fascinating time. And then what happened after that is Patrick Radden Keefe, when he came to Belfast to research this, and he went all over Ireland, he came to speak to me. And I spoke to him. I didn't speak to him for that long, for about half an hour or something. And then off he went, and then he wrote his article. And I'm not even sure I was mentioning the article or not. I'd need to go back and read it. And then he had written the book, and I was reading through the book. And when you get to the part of the book where he talks about me, he calls me slightly brassy.
Oh!
Now, none of the men involved in this book are described by what they look like. He calls me slightly brassy. I laughed at it. I know that other people took offence on my behalf, but I laughed at it because I like to think that I'm fully brassy and not just slightly brassy. And this is the point when, very posh, well-to-do people come and meet me. They're like, really? Anyway, so then I thought, when I knew that it was going to be, the drama was going to be made, I was like, who on earth is going to be playing me? I thought this is going to be, who's going to be the big brassy Allison Morris in this? And I was convinced it was going to be, the Math and Dairy Girls, like someone of that. And then it turns out to be the very demure actress with brown hair, which I haven't had since I was about 18, and wearing a twin set and looking very smart and demure and well. And I thought, well, she's not brassy at all. So I don't know why, between the book and the Disney drama, they decided to turn me into that person. But yeah.
But so, I would have been happy with that if I were you, because the way sometimes, well, most of the time, journalists are portrayed in drama in the most horrendous way.
Many you're people in bins.
Yeah, exactly. I've hoked in bins though in my time, I have to say, but many people think that.
No, I've never hoked in a bin, and I don't intend to ever hoke in a bin in any time in the future. But yes, it's always they're always, but not only that, but
there are always people of very low morals, I think, in fairness.
People that have low morals, but they always seem to be living in like a penthouse in Manhattan, and then they only write one story a year, and you're like, who's paying you? And how are you living this lifestyle on journalist wage? But yeah, no, she showed up, and she was, so it wasn't exactly how that happened. The actress doesn't look like me. She's got brown hair. The only thing I will tell you is one of my children said, and see, now you're like a Disney baddie, like Mufasa or whatever. We're like, next Halloween I'm going to dress up as you, but not you, like the Disney you, with the brown hair.
No, I definitely, if I were you, I would have been happy. I was quite impressed with you. I thought you were very respectable. I thought that you handled the whole thing very well. You weren't trying to turn her over or anything. You sat and you listened, you took your notes, you recorded. You were very responsible. I will say,
I generally didn't try and turn over. I was generally mesmerised by it. I mean, I remember listening back to the recording and transcribing it. And, there was long periods between questions, because once she started speaking, I thought, well, just don't interrupt her and let her go, because what she was saying was so interesting. And even the stuff about her being the first ever IRA woman, because prior to that, women joined the Coming Mall, and even that I thought was an interesting piece of history. Her being in charge of that IRA bombing campaign in England, that I thought was a fascinating piece of a piece of history. And then the stuff around the disappeared, which is probably one of the sort of murkiest periods of the Troubles, and yet this was a woman who was directly involved in it, and not only directly involved, and anyone who was involved in that would deny until their dying day being involved in it. And yet she was quite openly saying, "Yeah, I drove them all across the border." And the reason why she had been picked, first of all, there was very few sort of working class women from West Belfast would have even had a driving licence then. Dolours did have a driving, and also she was so attractive that she was often, it sort of showed you a wee bit of that in the drama, but she was stopped constantly by police officers in the army who just used to flirt with her and let her go because she was so striking. And so she used that to her advantage to move weapons around and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, the last thing they were expecting, certainly in those days. What about Marian Price? Is she still alive, did you say?
She is. She is still alive. I think she lives, she has children and grandchildren, and I think she lives quite a sort of quiet, almost reclusive life. She went to prison for the real IRA in terms of that Masserine attack, and she was in very poor health while she was in prison, and she was released again on health grounds. And I haven't seen her since. At one time, she would have appeared quite a lot at those sort of real IRA rallies. There's, an image of her standing holding a statement that a man in a mask is reading in a graveyard in Derry during one of the Easter commemorations, threatening, police and army. She stayed, I suppose, radical in that she joined one of those dissident groups, which I don't think Marian would have considered. She lives a quite quiet, I suppose, almost even reclusive life. And they're not that old, really. Even she's not even that old really now. I mean, she was a teenager.
But Dolours was only in her early 60s when she died in 2013.
Yeah. I mean, they're not pensioners. They're older women. She's an older woman now, but not.
She packed a lot into life, though, didn't she?
She did, and it was interesting, and I did think, I suppose, one of the things that I'd forgot about most of it, to be honest with you, until I watched the Disney drama, and I thought, like so many people who, I could think of lots of other sort of IRA members who, they were graduates from Queen's and they could have went on to do all sorts of things, and they joined the IRA and they've died, and either died or spent most of their life in prison, that she could have, and when you met her, you thought she could have done anything she wanted with life, because she was full of personality. She was beautiful. She was intelligent. She was so well spoken and very entertaining as well. When she told a story, she told it as if she was, it was like you could almost see like a drama. Like speaking to her was like watching a drama, because
she held you enthralled.
Every detail. She had you the sights and the smells and the sounds of what everything was like. She was very animated, and it was very interesting. It was a very sad end that she had, and in that way, I suppose, is it something that we could learn from? And I always think that, and what it has done too is, I suppose, it's introduced those times to a whole new generation of young people who do not but send me messages now and stop me in the street and ask me questions, because it was a time that is so far removed from them. It's history to them.
Yeah.
And
this is the thing, really, and sometimes it takes drama to, a really well-made drama to kind of make it real for them or whatever, and actually interest them again.
If it makes them then go and read, some books, and it makes them go and show an interest in the actual, I suppose, history of this place, because what do we always say? If you don't learn the past, you risk repeating it, so.
Yeah, and there's a lot of understanding necessary when, you're talking about the North, really, and all that's gone on. Well, look, it's an interesting job. We meet interesting people, and none less so than Dolours Price. And thanks for taking me over that. I actually wanted to do this with a bottle of wine. So,
we should have, really. We should have. It would have been very fitting to the memory of.
Yeah, but it would. I'd say we'd have HR down us if we were in our studios.
Well, I could tell you, I would end up telling you all the stuff that was legal out of the original story that we're never allowed to say, that I meant to take to my grave with me. But sure, I'll tell you that over about the one.
Absolutely. And listen, we're going to talk next week about something very important as well. So I look forward to that. Thanks a million, Allison Morris.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.